All right, let's put history's most famous conqueror under the microscope. For over 2.5 millennia, the name Alexander the Great has been the ultimate symbol of power, ambition, and total conquest. But as modern historians, we really have to look past the myth, you know? In this explainer, we're stepping into the shoes of investigators. We're going straight to the primary sources to objectively evaluate his true legacy. And that brings us to the core question historians always grapple with when looking at his massive empire, an empire that stretched literally all the way from Greece to India. Remember, he pulled this off in an era of incredibly slow communication and incomplete maps, somehow blending Greek philosophy, Persian administration, and Eastern traditions into this unprecedented cultural cocktail. But we have to ask, was this the work of a visionary, truly great leader? Or was he just an incredibly ambitious young king whose unchecked desires ultimately consumed him? To answer that, we're going to review the historical evidence across 5 key phases: the rise of a young king, securing the throne, conquering the Persian Empire, gods, kings, and mutiny, and finally, evaluating that final legacy. Okay, Section 1, the rise of a young king. To really understand the emperor, we first have to figure out the prince. The historian Plutarch records this defining early moment that shows us just how profound his capability and ambition already were. Picture this. A trader brings a massive, completely uncontrollable horse named Bucephalus to Alexander's father, King Philip II. Nobody can tame it. The beast is wild, rearing, kicking at absolutely anyone who gets close. But 10-year-old Alexander, he notices the horse is actually just terrified of its own shadow. So he approaches it quietly, turns it toward the sun, speaks softly, strokes it, and then rides it flawlessly. King Philip was absolutely astounded. He allegedly told him, "My son, seek a kingdom worthy of yourself. Macedonia is too small for you." That staggering pronouncement basically set the psychological baseline for the rest of Alexander's entire life. But King Philip didn't just want a warrior, right? He wanted a philosopher king. So he goes out and hires history's greatest philosopher, Aristotle, to give 13-year-old Alexander a deeply well-rounded intellect. We're talking heavy education in religion, art, logic, and philosophy, alongside other royal boys who would eventually become his most trusted generals. This foundation is absolutely crucial because it bred an ambition in him, not just to conquer the known world, but to deeply understand it and reshape it. He was, quite literally, being programmed to rule. And at just 16 years old, he gets his very first real test. While his dad was away on a campaign, this ferocious European tribe known as the Thracian Madi launched a rebellion. They probably figured, hey, a teenager can't possibly hold the kingdom together. Well, they were disastrously wrong. Alexander completely crushed the rebellion on his own. He drove them out of their territory and then, in a move of pure boldness, renamed their settlement Alexanderpolis after himself. He proved his early military genius right there and showed a startling level of absolute confidence. Which leads us into Section 2, securing the throne. Now, Alexander's path to power, it wasn't some peaceful transition. It was stained with incredible brutality. As recorded by the historian Diodorus, the assassination of his father in 336 BC triggered this ruthlessly efficient, violent consolidation of power. King Philip was actually stabbed to death by his own bodyguard during a grand wedding celebration. So at just 20 years old, Alexander is suddenly declared king. The broader kingdom immediately plunges into chaos. Facing potential rebellions from recently conquered, very proud states like Athens and Thebes, Alexander doesn't even pause to negotiate. He swiftly marches 3,000 soldiers to Thebes and utterly destroys the city. I mean, he killed thousands, sold the survivors into slavery, and sent a terrifying, undeniable message to the rest of Greece. Resistance means absolute annihilation. And as objective historians, we have to weigh these actions against his title of the Great. To secure his position, he and his mother, Olympias, ordered the calculated slaughter of his father's new wife, Cleopatra Eurydice. And they didn't stop there. They murdered her newborn child, her influential uncle Attalus, and just picked off various political rivals one by one. You simply cannot ignore this. The foundation of his legendary empire was built directly on the calculated slaughter of his own family and potential political threats. It was honestly a masterclass in Machiavellian ruthlessness, long before Machiavelli even existed. Moving on to Section 3, conquering the Persian Empire. With Greece completely subjugated through fear and force, his limitless ambition pointed him straight at the ultimate prize, the Persian Empire. Leaving Greece in the hands of a trusted general, Alexander crosses into Asia at just breakneck speed. He genuinely believed the massive Persian kingdom was his divine gift, just waiting to be taken. Within just a few short years, his fiercely loyal 40,000-strong army tore through Granicus, Halicarnassus, Tyre, and eventually Gaugamela. It was an unprecedented blitzkrieg that completely dismantled the greatest superpower of the ancient world. Modern historians like A.B. Bosworth highlight these specific events as absolute masterclasses in unconventional tactics and raw psychological warfare. At the Battle of Granicus, he completely shocked the Persians by launching a wedge-shaped cavalry assault directly across a rushing river, plunging straight into the heart of their defense. At Halicarnassus, he maintained this grinding, relentless 2-month siege against immense fortress walls until the Persians just broke. And my personal favorite, at Phrygia, when presented with the legendary Gordian knot, where ancient prophecy said whoever untied it would rule all of Asia, he doesn't even bother trying to unravel it. In an act of pure audacity, he just draws his sword and slashes it right in half. He wasn't just playing the game of war, he was completely rewriting the rules of engagement. But we have to remember, this tactical brilliance always carried a dark shadow. Take the island fortress of Tyre. When they resisted him for 7 months, Alexander commanded his men to spend that entire time building a massive half-mile stone bridge through the ocean itself, just to reach them. The engineering feat alone is staggering, but the aftermath? Chilling. Once inside, as historian Arrian notes, an enraged Alexander massacred 8,000 people in pure fury and then crucified thousands more along the beach. So again, we're forced to ask ourselves, is this strategic military dominance designed to ensure future surrenders, or just the unchecked cruelty of a tyrant? Let's jump to 331 BC and look at his most famous tactical victory, the Battle of Gaugamela, where he completely outsmarts King Darius's massive army. Facing terrifying scythe chariots and war elephants, Alexander perfectly angled his specialized troops. He actually ordered his men to create gaps in their lines on purpose, allowing the chariots to pass through harmlessly before destroying them from behind. Darius, absolutely terrified by the sheer, calculating ferocity of the Greek assault pressing directly toward him, literally fled the battlefield on horseback. This triggered a mass panic among his troops, leading to a decisive victory and the definitive collapse of the Persian Empire. That brings us to Section 4, Gods, Kings, and Mutiny. So having conquered Egypt, where, by the way, he was literally declared a living god, and having taken the Persian capital, our historian's lens shifts to his ultimate push into India. Alexander met his fiercest resistance yet from King Porus in the Punjab region. After a brutal fight in torrential rain at the Battle of Hydaspes, Alexander emerges victorious and captures Porus. But according to Arrian, this actually shows a rare diplomatic side to Alexander. He was so deeply impressed by Porus's physical bravery and tactical mind that instead of executing him, he offered him co-rulership. He recognized true greatness in his enemy. But here is where we reach the ultimate breaking point of our historical inquiry. We see a leader whose personal ambition became completely detached from the human limits of his own army. Alexander had already conquered more territory than any ruler in human history, stretching his empire across 3 continents. Yet, his limitless ambition drove him to push even deeper into India. His men, however, were entirely broken. They had marched thousands of miles. They hadn't seen their families or homelands in nearly a decade. Finally, the exhausted, weather-beaten army mutinied. They refused to take another step forward. And Alexander, forced to confront the absolute limits of mortal men, finally, reluctantly, agreed to turn back. On that long, punishing march back to Persia, his behavior fundamentally changed. Rather than just ruling as a Greek conqueror, he attempted this radical cultural integration that deeply unsettled his traditional Macedonian generals. He starts wearing Persian clothing, adopts the royal customs, and even demands his subjects prostrate themselves before him. In the city of Susa, he organized these mass weddings, essentially forcing his Greek generals to marry Persian noblewomen to legally blend the empires. Furthermore, modern historians like Robin Lane Fox and Paul Cartledge highlight his intimate relationships with men, most notably his lifelong intense companion Hephaestion. When Hephaestion later died, it sent Alexander into an unrecoverable spiral of grief. Basically, Alexander was evolving into an Eastern king, and in the process, actively alienating the very men who had bled for him in the dirt of Greece. Finally, Section 5, Evaluating the Final Legacy. Let's review the culmination of this extraordinary, totally contradictory life. After arriving in Babylon, completely ignoring his troops' exhaustion and already planning yet another massive naval campaign into Arabia, Alexander spent his days throwing wild parties. In early June 323 BC, after a night of exceptionally heavy drinking, he developed a severe, debilitating fever. After 12 days of sheer agony, where no medicine worked and his legendary strength completely failed him, history's greatest conqueror died. He was remarkably young, only 32 years old. To this day, his death remains a profound historical mystery. Some experts suspect targeted poisoning by his own disillusioned generals, while others point to diseases like malaria or typhoid fever. So, as we lay out the evidence objectively on this final ledger, we see a legacy defined entirely by its extremes. He was undeniably a brilliant tactician who revolutionized warfare at Granicus and Gaugamela. He was a unique cultural integrator who tried to blend the East and West at Susa and Alexandria. Yet he was also a ruthless tyrant who massacred entire populations at Tyre and murdered his own family to secure his crown. His limitless ambition literally brought the known world to its knees, but it also pushed his own fiercely loyal army to absolute mutiny. So we return to the question we started with. When we strip away the myth and just look at the brutal, brilliant facts, who was he? I leave you to weigh the evidence from this explainer and decide for yourself what his true legacy is. Was he the greatest visionary the world has ever known, or a man so consumed by his own ambition that he ultimately lost himself? Think about that, and keep